Let's meet the second candidate in a race that has no incumbent, Bill Evans. Mr. Evans, your opening statement of 1 minute, please.
Thank you. I'm Bill Evans, and I'm running for Assembly for the South Anchorage and Turnagain Arm District. I'm running because I want to do my best to ensure that Anchorage remains the same land of opportunity for future generations that it has been for my family. I believe in public service. I've served my country as a paratrooper and my community as a police officer and SWAT team member. Since moving to Anchorage in the 90s, I've served for 13 years on the Anchorage Chamber of Commerce, where we worked hard to improve conditions for business in Anchorage, particularly small business. I am currently on the Municipal Transportation Commission and the Municipal Employee Relations Board. But my main job for the past 20 years has been as an attorney representing private sector employers with their labor relations. I understand labor relations and collective bargaining, and I think that skill set and experience would be valuable on the Assembly. 80% of the municipal budget is tied up in labor costs, and it's imperative that we're able to effectively manage and control that large segment of the budget. Accordingly, I ask for your support on April 1st. Thank you.
Okay. You're a newcomer to elective politics. What do you think your strengths will be if elected?
Well, I think, as I said in my opening statement, I think my skill set and background as a labor attorney, my years of experience in different aspects of the municipal politics as far as the Transportation Commission, Employee Relations Board, and my ability to make good decisions. I think really the Assembly is about making decisions. I think those are the key strengths.
How much money have you raised and who are your main contributors? I realize this has to be roughly.
Yeah, roughly I think we've raised somewhere around $50,000. My main contributor, other than myself, I've put in my own money into the campaign, which I believe was important, have just been individuals. We've taken no money from any kind of PAC or any special interest group.
Okay. There are three candidates in this race. In your judgment, what distinguishes you from the other two?
I think, the job of Assembly is a job, and I think you have to look at it as such. I think if you look at my background, my resume, I have experiences that the others don't have in the business world. And also, I just think that our position on issues, I'm the only candidate in our race that supports AO 37, the labor ordinance. I was the only candidate that supported moving the election to November. So there's definite differences on the issues that are important.
Does your Assembly district have any special needs that you would like to address if elected?
I think all the districts have special needs. In our district, I think the main need is really our road system. We take into account the hillside and also Turnagain Arm. There's been a lot of growth over the years, but it hasn't really necessarily kept up with our transportation infrastructure. So those are the most important needs.
Okay, you touched on this, but why don't we talk a little bit about the Sullivan administration's revision of the labor law, which after all has dominated Assembly news for almost a year now. Do you support the changes? Tell us about that.
I do. What I like about AO 37 is that it places the accountability for the budget in the right hands, the elected officials. There's a lot in AO 37, but the three main components that I think are important for the voters to know about are that it eliminates binding arbitration, which may seem fair, but really binding arbitration places the decisions about how much the city is going to spend in benefits and cost in the hands of an outsider. I think the people elect the Assembly and the mayor to do that. It also eliminates public sector strikes, which I think in this day and age are simply unfair in the public sector. They add too much leverage to the equation and end up costing the taxpayers too much money. And finally, it encourages managed competition. Now, I'm not in favor of necessarily privatizing every government service, but I am in favor of being able to look at each service for opportunities to do it better and to do it more efficiently. And I think AO 37 accomplishes those three things.
How often in recent years have we gone to binding arbitration?
Hardly ever. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's been mercifully rare, which is another reason I think this law, it may seem like the end of the world to certain people. I think its actual effects on a day-to-day basis may be a lot smaller than people realize. What it really does is just place, again, that accountability with the right officials.
Okay. What about moving the initiative, the vote on the initiative to November? You said you supported that, right?
Well, I supported moving the elections, moving the April elections to November, which begins in 2017. Different issue than moving.
Okay, but why don't you bifurcate the question and
Sure.
Take it up.
First, I do support moving the elections to November as a general policy. I think we have a pretty good track record of people voting in November and a pretty abysmal track record of people not voting in April. The issues are too important, so let's put the issues where the people are voting. As far as moving the AO37 vote to November, I wasn't necessarily in support of that. I'd have been fine having it on the ballot in April. As a matter of fact, I'm mostly disappointed that people don't want to talk about the substance of that act. I keep trying to talk about what's in the act, and people just want to talk about when it's going to be voted on or the process that got there. It's an important act for Anchorage taxpayers, and I'd rather see people focused on the merits of it.
Okay. Alcohol continues to be involved in a disproportionate percentage of crime and disorder. What can be done to reduce the damage alcohol does in our community?
That's a great question. I was a police officer, as I mentioned, and I can attest to the fact that a very large percentage of the calls that a police officer goes on involve alcohol in some manner. Now we've tried prohibition, and that didn't work. I think we just have to have laws that are tough on those who abuse alcohol. I drink alcohol in moderation. And I think we have to be able to respect those that want to do that while at the same time cracking down on the abuses. I don't think there's an easy answer. I think as long as alcohol exists in society, there will be problems. But I think it's really a law and law enforcement issue.
Where were you a police officer and for how long? And what would you say is a major lesson you learned from that experience that you could apply here?
I was a police officer in a city called Euclid, Ohio, which is a major suburb of Cleveland. It was back in the 80s for about 6 years. The lesson I learned, I think the one I take away the most was, as you can see, I'm not the most physically imposing character as a police officer, so I had to learn how to get things done without a threat of force. And I think the way I learned that was basically if you can empower people in the decision making, it makes a world of difference. And I think that's just a lesson I can take to whatever I apply to.
Okay. The number of street people fluctuates, but street people who are homeless are a permanent part of the community. How can we reduce the number of street people and the friction between them and the rest of society?
Well, I think if you look at the demographics of the street people, you see a couple of problems that really drive that community, and one is substance abuse and then mental illness. For a while I actually served as the chair of the State Mental Health Board, and we were very familiar with this issue. I think one of the things we need is more treatment options. We do have a just tremendous lack of treatment available. At the end of the day, I think people with substance abuse problems are responsible for their own actions, but as a society, we have to make sure that there is treatment available for those who want it and those who seek it out. And I think that's the first step in trying to curb that problem.
For those who aren't familiar with it, what does the Mental Health Board do?
In the state of Alaska, there's a mental health board which has been combined with the alcohol and substance abuse board back during the time when I was on. It oversees issues that affect the mental illness community, treatment options. It helps administer some of the funds that come from the Mental Health Trust to go for those various programs.
Okay. We were talking about police officers and your experience. There have been a number of stories on the reduction of the size of the police force in Anchorage. Do we have an adequate number of police officers to get the job done here at the present time?
You know, I can't say for sure. I've seen a lot of the reports, and I've heard from a lot of the police officers that they do not believe that there is an adequate force. I think that is something we have to look into. I think that we certainly haven't been keeping up with the attrition in the retirements. We incentivized some retirements recently, and we lost a lot of experienced officers. The academy classes have been small, and I think we need to analyze exactly why that is, why we're not getting people through the process and onto the street.
Okay. The expansion rebuild of the Port of Anchorage seems to have become an endless source of tribulation. Money wasted, delays, pointed fingers. The word mess comes to mind. How do we get out of it?
Well, there's two things. One is the past and one is the future. The past was a mess. It was a project that seems to have been completely mismanaged by the group that was in charge. And right now it's going to be the lawyers sorting that out as to who's going to pay for that. and that process is in the works. I think going forward, we have to kind of put that behind us to some degree because the project has to occur. It's too vital to the city and to the state. It needs to happen, and we just have to make sure we do it right this time and move forward.
Okay. What is Anchorage's #1 transportation priority, sticking with transportation?
I think, well, you know, I'm on the Transportation Commission, so I have a natural tendency to think about taxi cabs, but I don't think that is really the #1 priority. I think the #1 transportation priority is just being able to move cargo effectively through our city. I think, you know, the highway-to-highway route is something we have to look at. Right now we have, you know, big major trucks stopping at every intersection in certain places of the city. So I think smoothing out the routes through Anchorage so that it's more or less seamless, and also the possibility of the bridge would make a big difference in that.
Yeah, why don't you tell us about that? What is your view of the Knickarm Crossing or proposed Knickarm Crossing?
In general, I support the idea of the bridge. I honestly believe it'll cost more than what's being billed as costing, as most of these big projects do. I think we'll have to subsidize it for a longer period of time than is being touted by the proponents of the bridge. But even with that, I think we should go forward and build the bridge. I just want to make sure that the citizens of Anchorage and the citizens of the state who will be paying for it understand exactly what they'll be paying for.
Okay, and generally speaking, there's a concern that there'll be less state and less federal funding for Anchorage. Have you given some thought to what this might mean and the consequences?
Yeah, I think that's the primary concern I have in running for office. I think as you look at the national level and the deficits we're running, there is a day of reckoning coming with that. And our state is in a similar situation with oil production declining inexorably. There's going to come a point, and it's probably not that far off, where we are not going to be able to count on funds from the state and federal government as we have in the past. And I want to make sure right now, while we have the opportunity, that we start focusing Anchorage's budget on days when those revenues are no longer as available. And I think if we start focusing that now, we can do the softer landing approach than when those funds actually run out.
Okay. Anchorage's elections are nominally nonpartisan, but are they really nonpartisan, now that you've had a chance to participate in this fashion?
No, I don't think they are nonpartisan at all. I think you know, people go out of their way to try to find out the philosophical background of the candidates because they want something to be able to distinguish the candidates.
Right.
And the candidates themselves use all kind of catchwords to try to let people know, you know, which philosophy they more or less ascribe to. So I think they're only nonpartisan in name but not in actuality.
Okay, if you visit our libraries, you will find them crowded. But are we providing enough money and resources to meet the needs of libraries in today's world?
It's hard to say. I mean, I'm a big proponent of libraries. When I was a kid, you know, I spent so much time in the library, and it was a big part of my development, I would say. So I love the idea of libraries, but what libraries do and how they relate to a city have changed sort of in this high-tech era with everything being online. So I think we have to rethink our libraries. And again, you know, I would love to be able to spend a lot of money on libraries, but the reality is, with that last question and the budget constraints we're facing, there's a limited amount we can do. So I think we just have to try to make each dollar go as far as possible and do the best we can with the libraries.
Okay. What do you like best about Anchorage?
The best thing about Anchorage, I came from Cleveland, and it's not Cleveland, although I love Cleveland, but it's a lot different city, as you can imagine. The best thing is really that Anchorage has big city amenities. Yeah, all the shopping, all the restaurants, all those things that's nice about living in a big city. But at the same time, you're a walking distance, literally, from real wilderness. And that's almost unique in our country.
If you had the authority to change something about Anchorage, what would you change?
Wow, what would I change? That's a good question. I'm pretty pleased with Anchorage the way it is. I would just like to keep it the way it is and just make everything a little bit better.
Okay. In that case, we'll just say thank you very much. Thank you for joining us, Bill Evans.